Much like the first game, Darkest Temple Run 2 is more of a stream game than play by yourself game. Doesn't mean it's a bad game, it's just sort of like that friend you have who is perfectly tolerable in a mix with your other friends, but one-on-one they are a completely different person with whom you barely have anything in common. Also, like the first game, DD2 would have played much better on mobile. DD1 actually does exist on mobile, on iPad only, that is, or on PS Vita. It's on the Switch too, of course, but all Switch is, it's a mobile phone from 2016 that comes packaged in with the shittiest, one of the most expensive backbones possible. The phone I'm currently using is much more powerful, has better screen, runs everything at 60 FPS, if not more, instead of 30, and at much higher resolution also. It's cheaper. Technically, it's almost free, really. Doesn't need to be jailbroken to run emulators. And unlike the Switch, actually does have working emulators of pretty much everything. I'm sorry, but I'm not getting the Switch to play games that should be on my phone. One day soon, Vita emulation on Android will allow me to have DD1 on my phone, though not right now, unfortunately. I'm just saying I wish there was an easier way to play a game that is technically already on the platform you want to play it on, but the developer just doesn't quite feel like taking maybe, I don't know, 100K out of the millions they made selling the game on PC to put it on to put the game on the most popular in the world and also the most fitting for the game platform to make more millions. I don't quite understand what is stopping them from doing so. DD2 has a similar problem, times a million, really. The runs are dungeon runs, right, are much longer this time, much longer. We are talking hours. It probably takes about 2.5, maybe even 3 to complete the first quote-unquote dungeon, and it only gets longer from there. The game would have been much better in short bursts, I think. There's another problem with bursts, though. It would have been better in short bursts if there was actually enough game per burst. If you play the game only 5 to 10 minutes at a time, you actually run a risk of not even getting to fight anything in a hypothetical burst. Still, would have made much more sense to be doing set bursts on your phone than to open the game on your desktop every time you want to play for 15 minutes. And 15 minutes is about how long it takes DD2 to become boring and you wanting to turn it off, if you're playing it by yourself. If you're a streamer, DD2 is a perfectly fine time waster to just hang out with your chat. Unlike DD1, which was in essence just a really punishing RPG with permadeath, DD2 is more of a proper, quote-unquote, roguelike. It still has elements of progression that aim to make the game easier, therefore slightly more enjoyable, and your run slightly more successful. But unlike DD1, where you one by one beat very kind of specific and unique dungeons and thus progress through the game, DD2 is more about replaying the same thing over and over again until you beat it. Yes, technically there are different dungeons to tackle, but they mostly differ in length and the final boss, not in the actual content of the dungeons. They are more like difficulty settings for the same and only level of the game, instead of being actual different levels. The dungeons are segmented into biomes, and the longer the run that you choose of really the same dungeon, the more different biomes, obviously, you will encounter in that run, but you will still be getting the same ones regardless of what quote-unquote level, what dungeon you choose. It's really just the same dungeon, no matter what mode you play. We might as well just call it length of the run. And yeah, there's only one dungeon in this game, really, and it's not even a dungeon, it's a run, a temple run, to be precise. Of course, you also lose all items after completing or failing a run. Items for the carriage, your temple run carriage, as well as all items for the characters. All of them. No more permanent armor or weapon upgrades or trinkets to take home, or you cannot even equip a trinket and just have it on your character more or less permanently. No, regardless. Everything in your inventory and everything on your characters, you lose all of it. Yes, there are permanent skill unlocks and minor upgrades for the characters, and you can permanently upgrade So, say the inventory space and the 2 different health bars for the carriage. Effectively, every run starts with everything completely fresh. Nothing really carries over between runs, even after successful ones, except for optional buffs called memories. You only get them, though, if the previous run you killed the boss, so you rarely gonna have them anyway. And they use candles to activate the hub currency used for unlocking and permanently upgrading stuff. So once you unlock multiple slots for memories per character, it becomes pretty expensive to feed those slots. And of course, every time you do, you choose to not spend your candles on unlocking something that you won't lose when the characters are inevitably killed or just don't kill the boss. So until you are reasonably upgraded, I would advise to ignore this mechanic. And even when you can afford it, it is still pretty much completely useless because you will rarely have access to it. So then once you can afford it, I would advise to ignore it some more until you invest into the upgrade that lowers the price of activating memories. No fun allowed really in this game until you invest into all the things that, break the limiter. And as I mentioned, I want to state it again, you only get memories by defeating the final boss of a previous run, so you won't have super much use for them because you will rarely have access to this mechanic. At the same time, there is a typical roguelike mechanic that lets you invest into literally just unlocking an item in the RNG pool of random bullshit items that you may or may not encounter in the world. But every time you do it, every time you unlock an item like that in DD2, the game for some reason just gifts you this item that you just unlocked to use in your next run. It puts it in your inventory. Just this time, the game adds it to your inventory just for free. You will never be able to get this item pre-run ever again. So that makes you almost not want to unlock items because you are essentially losing a free one every time you do. The only permanently unlocked items are the 2 sets of passive perks that are your pet and your flame, which you just need to pick up at no cost at the first inn of every run from the pool of pretty much, I think, all of the unlocked ones. They are not RNG. Like literally everything you have unlocked is going to be there for you to choose from. I'm talking about the inn at the end of that small pointless intro biome you have to go through every time. Really nice touch, by the way. I love that biome. There's so much purpose to it. Why couldn't those items be chosen pre-run and just stay chosen until changed? Once equipped, they cannot be swapped anyway. You can... I don't know. That can only be answered by the general roguelikeness of the game. The devs really went out of their way to make you feel like you are starting every run completely naked. Once you upgrade the starting amount of currency, you can actually begin buying trinkets and carriage items at the first inn, but effectively not being completely naked at the beginning of every run, but you will still have to equip them all every time, as well as re-equip all the skills of the characters that didn't survive the last inn, because those skills, like the list of equipped skills gets refreshed to it gets reset to default, and what is available at the first inn is randomized too, so chances of doing your build are actually very, very low. And of course, since neither combat items nor even trinkets carry over between runs, you have to buy and equip them for every character as well. So all the bandages, all the lava all of that shit, yeah. Have fun not only having to buy all that stuff, but now, in order to use any of it, needs to be equipped to specific characters. So it's just so much fun re-equipping all of this crap every time. Love it. DD1 was pretty much the same way, yes. Yes, all the leftover consumables were effectively lost at the end of the week. Technically, they were being sold, I think, or refunded, but for laughable prices. So you effectively just lost everything you didn't use in the run. So all of your shite needed to be bought for every quest, for every expedition, every run. I don't remember how it was called in DD1. But all the consumables were at least in the shared inventory So you didn't have to equip them for each individual character every time in order to use them. The only items like that in DD2 are the healing, stress reducing, and otherwise buffing items that can only be used at inns. Outside of inns, the only usable items are usable in combat, even when it doesn't make any sense at all. Outside of combat, you cannot even use the item that adds like fuel to your flame. Okay, you still cannot heal outside of combat, but I wouldn't bitch about it too much because at least in DD2 there's a giant health regeneration when the carriage is moving. So unfortunately, all of that is not fun to be doing over and over again while playing through the same areas over and over again without any meaningful progression being carried over between runs. You know, here's my guy, he wears this trinket I found during that one run, he has 2 of his most important skills unlocked or upgraded, as well as his armor and his weapon upgraded, he has permanent whatever, like plus 7% HP because of that, I don't know, Fountain of Youth incident we had a while ago, but he also gets permanently more stressed by, I don't know, everything because of spending a few minutes inside of a, I don't know, Eldritch God on the last run. That was DD1. There's nothing like that in DD2. It's a roguelike now, which means no fun allowed. Only banging your head against the wall until the wall maybe cracks a little bit. It's just about replaying the same thing over and over again with the same reset to 0 characters waiting for RNG to bestow win conditions upon you maybe one day. Doesn't necessarily make for a bad game. I actually think the game is quite good, but I also think that after finishing the first quote-unquote dungeon, DD2 starts feeling like just playing through the same experience of starting a new game every time, instead of progressing forward, at least somewhere. It gets old. Darkest Dungeon 1 was not like that at all. Another example of kinda like a roguelike-ish game, Hades, wasn't like that at all. It was super fun to replay, you know, Hades. Yeah, the game was freaking awesome because actually meaningful progression was happening during every run. You were not really wasting your time regardless of how successful the run was at the end. Slay the Spire is kind of like that, I suppose. It's somewhat similar to DD2 in certain ways, and much like Slay the Spire is the absolute king on mobile. I mean, like, why would you not want to play Slay the Spire while, I don't know, in the bathroom or like waiting on the kettle to boil? DD2's repetitive nature doesn't really sit well inside long, dedicated play sessions. Mobile would be just so much better for DD2. And Slay the Spire is fine on PC, but it gets boring after a while. On mobile, yeah, I can just play it every day. It should be addressed that most of the game isn't even combat. It's primarily temple running forward, occasionally choosing between going left or right, or, you know, going forward. Depending on the types of hazards and points of interest, you feel like either hitting or avoiding. You cannot even use items to relight the fire, as I previously mentioned. Items to reduce stress are also not usable outside of combat, and obviously you cannot heal outside of combat, be it, you know, with items or skills. All you do, you just ride forward, and that is about 70% of every run, if not 80, I would say, which is essentially another way of saying it's 70 to 80% of the game. When time comes to do combat, the game plays almost exactly like DD1, which is to say it plays really good, and I would even say better. There is a new friendship mechanic now, though, which I don't really understand. I have no idea how to influence it. It just sort of happens. Outside of combat, there's a very clear indication how choices influence it. Yes, but you are also making those choices to either get specific items or to maybe avoid combat. So the friendship influencing aspect of decision making often has to be ignored. And when friendship finally triggers in a negative way, for example, you ignore it even more. Like, you know, when instead of respect, which will trigger characters to do, I don't know, like follow-up attacks or whatnot, Characters can become resentful or envious of each other, which will make them stress every time the other character uses a specific skill, or maybe refuse to be buffed or healed. What, you're not going to use those skills now? Of course you will. There is a noticeable difference in art style from DD1. Characters now have more realistic proportions and are actually rendered in 3D. Looks good, in my opinion, but I don't understand why they had to move the opposing parties so visually close to each other on the screen. I think it looked better in DD1 with a bit more space between them. The game runs reasonably well on my potato, which means it will most likely fly on whatever you have, but for the kind of graphics DD2 is rocking, it is not super optimized at all. In truth, graphics like that should be flying on my rig as well. I'm telling you that as a highly professional Unity developer. The game does look pretty good, to be honest. I really like the visuals, probably even more than the first game. Just saying it's not entirely potato friendly, which is understandable in 2023, but still something you wouldn't necessarily think looking at these graphics, so just be aware. Once you upgrade the starting amount of currency and gain the ability to buy things at the first inn, good luck figuring out that upgrading that should be your number one priority, by the way, which means you can actually start outfitting your party and the carriage at the beginning of runs. The game does start to feel like you are on at least some kind of progression path, which is a very good thing. But the in items, as I mentioned previously, are always randomized, so that never offsets the need to re-equip the skills and all the items and the loss of skill upgrades also. Losing all that between runs really, really sucks. Also, again, what the first in, much like all the rest of them, has in stock is random. I don't think being a roguelike is a good fit for the Darkest Dungeon's RPG mechanics, which were never designed to be constantly started over. Imagine if in Subnautica you were losing all of your items, your base, all of the crafting stations, all of the materials, not only when you die, which is pretty much just permadeath mode, but every time you reached like a new point in the story, and you had to go back to the shallows every time and literally start over. Wouldn't be very fun, would it? Roguelikeness doesn't inherently fit every game type. Just like being an open world sandbox doesn't necessarily make every game better. Hades was specifically designed to be an enjoyable roguelike. They didn't just take an existing game, let alone an RPG, and said, let's roguify all aspects of it. Everything resets to zero on a new run. All the decisions you made about what to equip, what skills to upgrade, and all the items also, all of that is taken away. People like roguelikes, so it should be fun for them, right? My answer to that is no. You took something that worked, that was designed to be a very specific way, and you blindly changed everything that was good about its fundamentals. What is different to good? Bad. Congratulations, your new game is different now. Different from good. There are plenty of ways to make DD2 a better game while still keeping it a roguelike, but the devs had boxed themselves into making it as roguelikey as possible without looking into a much larger box of making a fun and rewarding game. This is about all I have to say about Darkest Dungeon 2, a roguelike inspired by Darkest Dungeon 1. It's a good game if you enjoy starting a new one every 2 to 3 hours, or if you are a streamer. I wish I had it on my phone. I recommend getting it on sale if you have a Steam Deck or a Decked with Razer Kishi or Backbone, something like that, phone to do stream remote play. The current price is $40 and it is absolutely offensive. The game is hardly worth even half of that. Roguelike is a staple genre of the indie scene characterized by small developers making small games with small amount of assets but huge replayability. Darkest Dungeon 2 hardly has any replayability, but to each their own. However, charging $40 for it is something that developers should be straight up ashamed of. If you feel like this video is too surface level and it doesn't talk about Darkest Dungeon 2 enough, I invite you to watch the first 4 minutes of it 22.5 times, which according to Red Hook's logic should provide you with the same amount of content as an in-depth 90-minute review.